For the past few weeks, I've been recreating Deltarune's battle system in Godot. By combing through screenshots, videos, and some of the game's code, I've tried to understand how the base mechanics work and how to remake them. Hello, I'm DevFoodle. As you're probably aware, Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 are releasing quite soon. They'll probably be out by the time you see this video. I'm a big Deltarune fan. Some of the first videos on my channel were no-hit runs of Chapter 1 bosses. In light of the upcoming release, I decided I wanted to make something related to Deltarune. More specifically, I focused on recreating Deltarune's combat system. I'll be going over how the process went, what I learned along the way, and how you can use the system yourself. Let's get right into it. Recreating the UI. First, I need to explain the basics of Deltarune's graphics. The game natively runs at a 640 by 480 resolution, which is a 4:3 aspect ratio. Almost all of the sprites in the game are then rendered either at their base resolution or scaled up by a factor of 2. Also, the entire game runs at a fixed 30 FPS. Now we can get into the first part of recreating Deltarune, which is recreating its UI. I took a bunch of screenshots of different battles in Deltarune across different menus. I imported them all into Godot, which is my image editor of choice. I used Godot's selection tool to measure the positions and sizes of sprites, and I used Godot's ruler tool to make sure those measurements matched what I had in game. Together, these allowed me to quickly position and size different parts of the UI. Before we can get into positioning the UI though, we need the assets that were used to make it. The UI has a lot of custom sprites. To remake these, I measured their size in Godot, and then created new files in ASprite with the right dimensions. Using the color picker tool, I was then able to recreate the palette that each sprite used. For the most part, I tried to draw the sprites by eye. I could have copied and pasted them from the screenshots, but I wanted to be able to add my own personal touches along the way. Also, there's a special trick I used for sprites to have the same resolution and the same color palette. For example, the icons used in each character's menu. I chose to pack them all into one big image called a sprite sheet. This meant there were fewer separate files and that it was easier to copy and paste similar elements found in each icon. I could then tell Godot that the image is composed of 6 separate horizontal frames and manually set which frame each sprite knows to use. The other asset I'll need for this recreation are fonts. There's a couple fonts used in combat. First, there's 8-bit operator, which you'll probably recognize as the most common font used throughout the game. There's also a bunch of fonts only used in one place, such as the font for displaying health, the font for each character's name, and the font under each action you can take. I downloaded whatever fonts were available online, but many of these were created specifically for Deltarune, so I had to remake them myself. First, I used ASprite to create a sprite sheet with all the important letters or numbers. Then, I used a feature in Godot that allows you to import pixel art images as fonts to quickly set them up in my project. This was surprisingly easy. There's even a setting that allows you to manually set the spacing between different letters. There's one last aspect of the UI that I'd like to go over, and that's the TP bar. While there's many ways to go about creating this, I decided to make a custom shader for it. The shader does 4 main things. First, it reads from a texture mask I created. If the pixel lies outside the mask, it's discarded. Second, the shader is given a fill value between 0 and 1. Each pixel is drawn only if the Y coordinate of the pixel is below the fill value. Third, it splits the UV bar into 2 parts, the top 2 rows of pixels and the rest. The top 2 rows are drawn with white and the rest is drawn with orange. Finally, if the TP bar is at 100%, then it renders it all as yellow instead. With the UI finished, we can move on to the main meat of the game, the pellet dodging system. The first thing I implemented was the battle intro and outro transitions. I started by using a tween to rotate and scale the battle borders at the same time. Then I had a script to create a duplicate of the borders each frame, and then faded each copy over time, creating the afterimage effect that the main game has. With the transitions finished, I then needed to recreate the soul that you control during combat. This was surprisingly simple. The soul moves at a constant speed in the direction you're holding, and it switches to a lower constant speed when you hold Z. As far as I can tell, the soul's hitbox matches perfectly to the sprite, so that was also easy to implement. Finally, I made a small circular area around the soul, so that when you get close to pellets, you gain a little TP. Speaking of pellets, I should go over the basic system I made for those. Each enemy in the game can have drastically different bullet patterns, so I had to make a very flexible system. There's a main pellet class that all enemy attacks have to override. It only contains code for damaging the player, nothing else, which should make it as unrestrictive as possible. From this base pellet class, I made a generic pellet scene that contains code for either constantly accelerating or constantly rotating pellets. This allowed me to test out a basic battle before I had any proper enemies implemented. Characters and monsters. With the main systems finished, I guess it's time to create a real battle scene, with players and enemies. Similar to Pellets, I wanted to create a very generic class that could support a wide range of different characters. The base character class is a no 2D, and its functions for stuff like doing attacks, getting a list of possible actions, taking damage, and so on. It also includes a bunch of variables for stuff like name, health, and defense. This is quite a lot more complicated than the Pellets, but it's all necessary to create a working character. For a base character, I chose to create my own design. I designed this little blue robot and made some basic animations for it. It isn't particularly polished, but it should be fine for this project. Another aspect of my character system is that you can have multiple copies of a character fight in the same battle, so I'm going to be using 3 copies of my robot as the player team. Now for the monsters. The way I set this up is almost the exact same as how I set up characters, so I'm going to skip past some stuff. For this battle, I designed a basic slime enemy. It does 2 attacks, one where a slime bounces around the cage, and one where drops of slime rain down from above. Plus, when there's multiple slimes alive, there's a chance that both attacks will play at the same time. Just like in Deltarune, you can either kill it or spare it. I won't go over what exactly you need to do to spare it, just in case you want to try it out for yourself. Changes and limitations. There's one last thing I'd like to talk about with this project. That's the differences between my battle system and Deltarune's, because there are quite a few changes. The most obvious are the custom characters and monsters. I wanted to inject some of my own art into this, which is also why many of the icons throughout the UI aren't exact copies either. The final thing I want to go over is sound design. For this project, I chose to mostly ignore adding sound or music to my game. Most of the sound design throughout this video was added in post. I will very likely revisit this project in the future to refactor major areas of the code and add in new features, so I decided it wasn't too important to get sounds in right now. Outro. Alright, that's my journey of recreating Deltarune's combat system. If you want to play the demo battle for yourself, I've uploaded a free web version on itch.io that you can play right now using the link in the description. If you want to use the battle system for your own projects, all of the code is in a GitHub link also in the description. It's fully open source, so feel free to use it however you like. If you make anything cool, make sure to let me know, I'd love to see it. I'm DevPoodle, and I appreciate you watching this. Goodbye!